So this week we look at muscle tissue and the action of muscle in the body. Probably the most important concept here is to correctly recognize the three types of muscle. It's very, very important to remember that there are three types rather than two, and by the end of this mini lecture, it'll become pretty clear why that is. The two primary divisions of muscle in the human body are skeletal muscle and smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle is the exact same thing as voluntary muscle. Smooth muscle is involuntary muscle. So skeletal muscle is what you control. Skeletal muscle is what you can, your brain can consciously command your body, your muscles to do. When you decide to walk across the room, you're utilizing skeletal muscle. Brain is telling the muscles in your legs, here's what you need to do, contract, relax, let's get to walking. Any body function or muscle function that you can control with your own will and mind is skeletal muscle, or carried out by skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle, of course, is the opposite. It's involuntary muscle, and it's the body functions over which you have no control. So smooth muscle is found in places like the digestive tract, because you don't have to consciously think about digesting your food. So smooth muscle are the muscles you don't have to consciously control, and skeletal muscles are the ones that you do. Now, one important distinction here, you'll remember that I said we have three types of muscle rather than two. The third type of muscle is cardiac muscle. Probably the most common thing that people get confused about with regard to the types of muscle is cardiac muscle. It isn't classified as involuntary muscle, even though it's involuntary and it's beating. You certainly don't think about having to force your heart to beat. But the key that sets cardiac muscle apart from all the other types of muscle in the human body is that it's automaticity. That's a term you need to know. Automaticity refers to the ability of the heart to beat by itself independent of anything else in the body. In other words, it doesn't require any stimulus in order to perform its functions. It stimulates itself. It's the only muscle in the body that can do that. If you sever the spinal cord and you sever the pathway between the brain and say you're paralyzed mid-chest down, all of the smooth and skeletal muscle that exists distal to that site are at risk for dysfunction or losing function. The heart is not. So for patients who, like Christopher Reeve or other people who have fractured very, very high in the C-spine, they may be quadriplegic from the shoulders down without any ability to control muscles of various kinds. But you'll notice that the heart isn't paralyzed in the process. So when that occurs, the reason that the heart sort of is able to continue on its own independent is because of automaticity. It can generate its own impulse. And so that's what puts it in a third category, a special category of muscle all by itself. It's true that the heart is involuntary. That's true in every way, but its automaticity is what makes it cardiac muscle. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when the muscle dies from a heart attack or a cardiac arrest or whatever the case might be, the reason the heart dies is that its inability to receive oxygenated blood causes tissue death itself. So in other words, the heart will generate itself to beat sort of no matter what's going on in the human body until the tissues become so deprived of oxygen they can no longer respond to the automaticity impulses. So be sure that as you go forward, you remember that even though cardiac muscle is involuntary in nature, it's not smooth muscle because it has the characteristic of automaticity.